Welcome back to another episode of the Breakthrough Brand Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're talking about visualization, goal setting, declaring what's possible for yourself, and so much more. And my hope in this episode is that it will encourage you to believe in yourself and believe in what's possible for you, and that the techniques and all the information and facts I'm sharing will help you do exactly that. They'll help you believe in yourself and see what's possible. So let's dive in. Hey guys, it's Elizabeth McCravey, and you're listening to the Breakthrough Brand Podcast. Each week, I'll bring you workshop-style trainings that teach you how to stand out online, design success from the inside out, and create a breakthrough business. It's time to turn viewers into raving fans and design the business and life of your dreams. I'm so excited you're here. All right, before we dive into the episode content, I want to give a little life update that actually is relevant to what we're talking about here. And it's really hard for me to talk about. I've actually re-recorded this. This is my 5th time re-recording this little intro right here. But at the time of recording this, my amazing dad, who many of you know I was really, really close to, he passed away unexpectedly. And it has been crazy. It has been a whirlwind of emotions. And we prep content for this podcast in advance, so you guys are hearing this a while later. But my dad passed away on June 19th from a heart attack in his sleep when he had been doing really well. Prior to that, but had gotten a little sick for like one day really, and passed away. And it's been a whirlwind of emotions, to say the least. Like sometimes I've felt in the past little while here, okay, and like working, like maybe I want to hang out with friends and do something fun, which is kind of how I felt right now. I'm feeling a bit emotional now I've started recording. But other times I've felt like crying or like just too emotional to even have the desire to do much of anything. It's just been really strange. And I found a pleasant distraction some of the time in doing things like cleaning out my dad's house, managing his business, which is a very interesting story. Right now, my husband and I are running my dad's business. Like Adam is literally going to the sawmill tomorrow to like work on things, which we don't live in the same town as my dad did. So he's driving there for that. That's a whole nother story, but it is definitely not normal over here. And grief is just really strange. It's not even able to really be described until you've experienced it. Like this kind of thing is how I would say it. But it's like not a steady flow of all those stages we see of like, here are the steps of grief, but more like back and forth between all of them, like at any given moment. And I want to say too on this before I finish this little life update, but I felt so much peace from the Lord about all of this. And I felt, and again, not every second, because I've had lots of like anger and like, why did he have to pass away and all of that. But I felt the prayers and love from so many of you. And I know my family has as well. And it's interesting because I know my dad is okay. I know I think it's wonderful thinking about how I know he's in heaven, probably having like the time of his life, as we would say. But it's like the mourning, is really for the people here who loved him. So anyway, I want to say thank you to all of you for so many of you sent gifts, the sweet messages, all the love. It's really meaningful and felt. And my business will probably look a little different in the rest of the year. 2020, what a crazy year. But to kind of transition here, and that whole everything I just said was very scattered, and I've recorded that like 5 times, so we're keeping this version. But yeah, thank you for the prayers and everything. And to transition to the topic, because I know that's what you're here for, but I want to say this is the first podcast episode I'm recording since my dad passed away. And if you listen to my episode a few back about my podcasting process, definitely listen to that one if you haven't. But then I'm always thinking of ideas, and I keep like a rolling list in my phone, and actually like started on outlines all throughout my phone notes app that are things like, I'm like, okay, I need to do an episode of that, and I'm just waiting to record it. And the reason I wanted this to be the first podcast I'm recording since kind of stepping back up to the mic after this, is because my dad suggested I do an episode about this like 2 months ago. So a fun thing, my dad actually listened to this podcast. Not every episode, like I know many of you do. He was not like a loyal binge listener by any means, but he listened to a lot of them, and he's seriously been my biggest business cheerleader ever. And it was really fun to me always talking to him about online business and how that works, because he also runs a business, but so different than the kind of businesses you and I run. And anyway, he listened to this show, and a little while ago, I was on James Wedmore's podcast, which, by the way, speaking on today's topic, that was something I visualized and made a goal before it happened, like way before. And my dad listened to that interview actually twice and was like absolutely just in love with that conversation, had so much positive feedback to give me about it, which was really fun. I'm glad he got to listen to that. And he told me, though, that his favorite part of that whole episode was what I say at the very end. And so at the end of it, James asked me, hey, do you have any final advice for the listeners? And on that little piece of advice that's just like, again, like last 2 minutes, I talk about visualization and declaring things true before they happen. And it was at the very end. So if you quit listening early, you would have missed it. But it was like our last little bit we say there. And so I'm going to dive into that today, into what I mentioned there and more about my thoughts on that and how this has impacted my business. And if you missed the episode on James' podcast, I will link to that in the show notes so you can listen to that too after this one. So anyway, this episode's for my dad. I want to dedicate to him. He said he wanted to hear more about this. So here we are, and we're going to dive in. All right, so as I get into these tips, I want to say I'm not like the world's expert on visualization or anything like that, and I know that. However, this is something I've done for years without even knowing specific terms for it. And I believe that this works and has helped me, has been a tool really that has helped me get to where I am in my business in so many ways, combined with disciplined work and also trusting the Lord with the outcome. But I want to say I'm just not an expert on this, and I'm going to teach you what I know from one businesswoman to another. And I also want to say too, and I'm curious if you are too, and this is kind of an important thing to maybe identify, I'm a really visual and imaginative person, have been ever since I was a kid. And I'm sure since I'm a designer, you could kind of see that maybe of like designers need to be visual. But even more than that, I love being creative and imaginative, and I love drawing on intuition for decisions. I'm a natural daydreamer, and I think all of those kinds of traits have helped visualization as a tool come really easily and natural to me. I do it without intending to even, but if that's not you and you're like, oh, I'm actually not a natural daydreamer, I don't feel like I'm as natural of an intuitive person, that's okay. I still think this is stuff you can learn and try on for your own life and business to see what you think. But I want to kind of start us off with this quote from Bo Bennett. And I think this sums up really well. Visualization is daydreaming with a purpose. Again, like I say, I'm a natural daydreamer. Visualization is making that purposeful. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you 3 ways of like how visualization works. And then after that, I'm going to walk through 5 ways I personally put visualization into action, 5 ways I'm using it in everyday life to create the success and outcome I want for my future. So first, I feel like it's important to say why, like how it works, why it matters, all of that. So that's why I want to dive into those 3 things. So the first way, it gives you clarity, which might seem obvious, but when you actually know what you want, it's easier to go get it. So basically, I think visualization sparks desire and keeps you focused and attentive to what you want to happen versus kind of just more haphazardly living your life. So this kind of goes back to even just the concept of something like goal setting. Like if you listen to this podcast even a little bit of time, you probably know that I am a big believer in goal setting. This connects to that as well. If you have no goal, then there's no direction. If you can't see it in your mind, then it's harder to move in that direction as well. So having something you're working towards gives you both direction and clarity, and also helps you connect in a more direct way to your future self through that clarity. So that's the first way. It just gives you clarity. The second way, visualization prepares your mind for an action before the action actually happens. So this helps with fears around big things because you've already done it in your mind. And so you're going to hear me talk about this when I dive into the ways I use visualization. But when there's a big event, a big podcast interview, something I'm nervous about, I visualize it happening successfully before it's happened. And then the act of doing the thing is less scary because I've already done it in my mind. And a cool thing, the brain doesn't differentiate between a real memory and an imagined one. You can read about this all over the internet, but that's one of the many reasons why visualization is so big in the sports world. And I feel like that's actually where I've learned about the most is people who are athletes talking about it and then it being applied to things like online business, but it's really big in sports. And so I want to read you a quote that I just love. And this is, and I'll link to this podcast in the show notes because I'd really encourage you to listen to it. But Ed Milet, his show, it's called The Ed Milet Show, is one of my absolute favorite podcasts. And he had Phil Mickelson on it, who is a professional golfer. And I literally know nothing about golf, but listen to this interview because I'm like, this is a very high achieving athlete who I want to learn from. And they just had the best conversation about really all kinds of things, but Phil talks specifically about visualization and how that plays a role in his success as a golfer. And so I want to read you that quote he says in that interview. And again, I'll link to that episode in the show notes too, if you want to check out that podcast. But here's what he says. The difference between the number one guy and the 50th guy on tour has a lot to do with his ability to visualize and see shots before it happens. A lot of people have the ability to execute the shot, but if you can't see the shot you're trying to execute, you'll never be able to hit it. The people that see the clearest, that visualize the clearest, rise to the top. Okay, I just feel like that's such a good way to sum up what I'm saying here is like he talks more about this in the episode, but how he literally will intentionally visualize himself playing well in golf before it happens. And then he's saying the difference between the number one guy and the 50th guy is the ability to see and visualize it before it happens, the winning. So anyway, that's a really great interview to listen to, but that's my second reason here is it prepares your mind for an action before the action happens. And I also want to say I'm sharing 3 ways this is beneficial, but there are a lot more than that. I'm not trying to talk forever here to you guys. Okay, so the third way, our brain aligns our life to fit our beliefs. Okay, and just maybe wind that back to hear me say it again if you want to make sense of it. But we find evidence all around us based on our belief in what we see in our minds. We look for evidence based on our beliefs in our world. So our brain aligns our life to fit our beliefs, not the other way around. So to kind of put that in like an actual example, if you believe you're not capable of running a successful online business or doing X, Y, and Z, then you're going to see evidence of that everywhere. If you believe, hey, I'm absolutely capable of doing this, you're going to find evidence for that. So again, going back to that podcast interview with Ed Milet, I promise what I'm sharing is not just based on that interview. I just recently listened to it and I was like, I need to include some of this. So here's something he says on the episode about visualization. Your mind gravitates towards what it's most familiar with. So if your mind is most familiar with the best shot, the perfectly executed meeting, etc., then you gravitate in that direction. If it's obsessed with fear, failure, or something vague, it moves that way. So see, I feel like that first sentence is so important. Your mind gravitates towards what's most familiar with. So visualizing things, like I'm going to tell you some ways to do in a moment, gets your mind familiar with already doing that. It gets you in the headspace that, hey, that thing's actually doable. So if you believe it's going to be really hard, your brain goes to work to prove that right. If you believe it's possible for you, whatever that desire is, it goes to work to prove that's true. So basically, the results we focus on can come to fruition, our actual reality through the focus. So yeah, we notice things differently when we visualize them first. And yeah, those are my 3 ways. I'm going to get into the tips now, but I also want to say, I don't think visualization is some like magical thing. I don't think that, but I do think it helps us change our state and change our minds and change our beliefs, which then causes us to take different action. and see the world differently, like literally through different eyes. And it makes us more intentional about our circumstances and reality. So I hope all that resonates with you guys. You're still listening, so I guess so. And now I want to get into 5 ways I use visualization to create success. Okay, so these are just like 5 ways. Again, I could share a lot more, but 5 things I particularly do. Okay, so the first one, writing down crazy goals and dreams with specifics as if they have happened already. Okay. So this is one of the 2 things I mentioned on the interview on James's podcast. There were 2 particular ways I talked about visualization, but this was one of them. So during my spring launch earlier this year, I wrote an Instagram post, didn't post it, but like scheduled it to go out when I was writing my content, because I write my Instagram content in advance as well. And so I wrote this post, and I said in the post that I had my biggest launch yet. And there was more to the post than that. It was not like let me brag about my launch. It was actually a post that I was feeling pretty fired up about when I wrote it, about the concept of, should I be selling right now with everything with COVID-19? There were a lot of business owners saying it's selfish to sell right now. I completely disagreed with that and still do. And so I wrote that post about that. And then I said in it, hey, you can sell right now if you feel comfortable with that, if that feels aligned for you. And I had my biggest launch yet during this time. And I will link to that Instagram post if you want to read it in the show notes. But an interesting thing about that, I wrote the post before the launch week happened. I think it might have been on the first day of the launch or the day before. It was really close to it, but it was before I knew for certainty that it would be my biggest launch yet. I wrote it. And so that's an example of like writing something as if it had already happened before it has happened. And I didn't like publish it beforehand or do anything like that. But I was like declaring it so. Okay, I want to I actually have 3 other examples of this from people that you will have heard of that are not me, to kind of show you some other ways this can play out. And as you hear these, including my Instagram post example, I want you to think about which of these resonates with me, and maybe would I want to do one of these for a big goal I have in my business. The first thing, you guys, too, is to know what you even want to work for, which is like, that's a whole nother conversation. So with all of this, I'm kind of assuming that you've done some of that work, figuring out what it is, like what's the crazy goal and dream. And if you haven't yet, though, I want to say the 4th thing I'm going to talk about here is going to help you kind of figure that out if you don't feel like you know like what your crazy dream is. So just keep listening for that. Okay, so the examples from other people's, and I'm going to link to sources of these stories in the show notes. So Demi Lovato, we all know who she is, right? So she wrote a tweet in 2010 saying, and I'm going to read you, this was exactly what the tweet said: "One day I'm going to sing the national anthem at the Super Bowl. One day." Okay. In 2020, 10 years later, she did sing the national anthem at the Super Bowl. And people all there are tons of articles talking about it because people found that old tweet where she had written that 10 years earlier, and then she did it. Okay. Another example, I think this is a really fun story. So Jim Carrey wrote himself a check for $10 million when he was a struggling comedian. So he wrote a check that was, again, for $10 million to himself that said, as like the note of why it was being paid, acting services rendered, and he dated it 10 years later. So he did this in 1985 when he was a struggling comedian, and dated it for 1995. And he kept it tucked with him in his wallet all those years. Definitely was thinking about it. That's something too I want to note here. One of the reasons this is powerful is because you've declared it and now you're focusing on it. So then in 1995, he got casted in Dumb and Dumber and was paid $10 million for it. So another crazy story there. Interrupting this episode with a suggestion for the small business owners listening. Ever wonder what you should do for healthcare when you and your spouse are both self-employed, so there's no work-provided health insurance to participate in? Well, when my husband Adam joined me in the entrepreneurial job space over 4 years ago, we joined Christian Healthcare Ministries instead of getting traditional health insurance. And it was the best decision for us, especially in these years of growing and raising a family while also running multiple businesses. CHM is a health cost-sharing ministry and is a faith-based alternative to health insurance. We did tons of research before choosing CHM, and if you know me and Adam, you know we are all about doing the math when making big or small financial decisions. And even though it's not insurance, CHM shares 100% of eligible medical bills, which is more than the typical 70 or 80% of medical bills paid for by insurance companies. All sharing is determined by the CHM guidelines, which you can check out before and after joining. And for the mamas and mamas to be listening, you truly cannot find a better healthcare option for maternity care. I had a vaginal delivery and a C-section and birth center care and hospital care between my 2 pregnancies and births, and it was all 100% shared for. And outside of birth, we've had our share of emergency room visits and procedures as a family, and those costs were all shared by members at Christian Healthcare Ministries, leaving us only paying our monthly contribution. CHM is less expensive month to month than insurance, and because there's no network, you can choose your care with whichever providers best fit your family. I seriously just cannot recommend Christian Healthcare Ministries enough. You've got to check them out. Go to elizabethmccravey.com/CHM for more information. Also putting that link in the show notes, elizabethmccravey.com/CHM. Now back to the episode. Okay, another story. So we all know the chicken soup for the soul books. And I'm going to read you because I feel like he just says it in a way I'd rather read you what he said versus telling you. But Jack Canfield, who founded that book company, here's something he said about what he did early on when starting his business. So he says, when we were writing the very first Chicken Soup for the Soul book, we took a copy of the New York Times bestseller list, scanned it into our computer, and using the same font as the newspaper, typed Chicken Soup for the Soul into the #1 position in the paperback advice, how-to, and miscellaneous category. We printed several copies and hung them all around the office. Less than 2 years later, our book was the #1 book in that category and stayed there for over a year. Now that's a pretty solid example of a successful visualization technique. So I think that's really cool. So I'm linking to all 3 of info about those stories if you want to look them up. So think about do those resonate with you? Any of those sound like something you'd want to try? And if you're all of those seem like a little outlandish to you, that's okay. And I want to tell you a simpler version of this could be writing a really big goal with specifics as if it has already happened, just on paper in a notebook. So when you write the goal, instead of saying something vague like my goal is to have a 6-figure year in my business or to have a 6-figure business, which is what does that even mean is the question I would ask back to that. Instead of writing that, write by the end of 2020, I have made $300,000 in my business revenue. As an example, see how specific that is. There's an end date. And you're also phrasing it as if it has already happened by the end of I have. Or you could even say, it's the end of 2020, I have made, and phrase it that way. And you guys, you can do this around financial goals. You can do this around any goals though. And you can even see the reason I chose those 3 examples is because one of them was getting on a list of, the book being on a list. One of them was doing something like Demi Lovato at the national anthem. And then one of them had to do with financial goals. So anyway, they're all different ways of doing that. So with this first tip here though, I just want to ask you to think about what big goals do you have and how could you do something similar? Maybe it's even just a sticky note about how many clients you're going to serve this year. Maybe it's a check like Jim Carrey to yourself with your revenue goal for the year. You guys, when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this live, we're a little over halfway through 2020. So you could think, what do I want to make the rest of the year and write that on a check? Maybe it's a written out description of your dream house or some dream program you want to create in your business, whatever it is. And again, the purpose of this is because it changes our attention. So this gives your mind clarity on what you're working towards and it prepares your mind for action because what we focus on, we work towards. So when you're actually thinking about these things, you're more likely to go out and get them and see opportunities when they come up. All right, my number 2 way I use visualization. So this is a journal prompt that I love. So here's the prompt. I am ready to welcome fill in the blank into the world. So I want you to, after this episode, scroll back to episode number 23 if you haven't listened to it, and you can hear about my favorite daily journal prompts. I think I shared 10 on that episode, 8 to 10. And you can also download a freebie with all those journal prompts. I will put that link in the show notes for this episode. But I love this particular prompt of declaring what you're ready to welcome into the world because, again, it gets your mind revved up and your energy revved up to actually go and make that thing happen. And you can phrase it differently. Maybe it's I'm ready to serve, I'm ready to create, I'm ready to do. It can go so many different ways. And this prompt can be you filling in one particular goal for that day, a goal for the whole year, a goal for the month, a goal for the week, a goal for the quarter, or it can be like a long form journal entry you do about different things you're ready to welcome into the world. And again, keep listening, because on the fourth tip I'm going to share is that I have a little way to help you get clarity on like what your big dream would be. But I think this one's so important of I'm ready to welcome blank into the world. And again, that's episode 23 if you want to listen more on that one. That's all I have for that tip, is that that's a journal prompt I do often. And again, it helps you connect even in a visual sense. Even if you're writing it, I feel like it can be visual in a way of writing it out of what you're ready to welcome. Okay, the third one. I go on visualization walks with myself. So might sound weird. Let me explain. So this is a really regular thing for me, like a once a week at the very least. And it's rarely something I plan to do. I'm very rarely like, I'm going to go on a visualization walk. It literally just happens. So basically, the way it happens is I will decide I'm going to go on a short walk or walk around the track at our gym after a workout. I've done this less lately because I live in Tennessee and it is insanely hot outside in the summer here. But I like to just go on short little walk breaks because I sit all day working. And so I will go on a walk planning to listen to a podcast. But then I have my AirPods in, I'm listening, but pretty quickly into the podcast, I'm just daydreaming and visualizing. So I turn off the podcast, but then I leave my headphones in and I just walk and think and visualize. And if that sounds really weird to you, that is totally fine. You are free to not try any of these things and just observe or try them out if you want, but I'm just sharing what I enjoy and kind of how my brain works on going to work. And I really think that time of visualization walks is like so huge for me. I literally, yesterday at the gym after a workout, I did this and thought about this episode, thought about sitting here like I am right now, recording this. It could also be done while laying down with your eyes closed. I like the movement personally because I think my brain works better when I'm moving around versus lying down, which again, like it's gonna be different for everyone. I'm a pacer and like if I could, I would like type on my laptop while just pacing around. So I like to move around. But if you want me to I want to get a little more specific here. So some examples of what I've done, times with visualization walks of like when they've been impactful or when it would be maybe helpful to try this out. So one time before a big launch in your business. So for me, I go on a lot of walks and visualize things like talking to potential customers, explaining the offer on Instagram Live, seeing customers come in, seeing customers using the product even, seeing your clients being successful, all of that. So before a big launch is one. Another time before something that is scary. So this is another time I do it. So like a big podcast interview or a big speaking engagement, I will visualize myself answering the questions or doing the talk at an event. Sometimes I will actually just practice it, like again, pacing around and being like, okay, I'm asked this question. Here's how I answer it. And maybe for you, that looks like it's a big client call with someone you really want to work with, or an Instagram Live you're nervous about, or an important blog post where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to come up with the words to say it. Like visualizing yourself doing the thing will be really helpful. Going back to like the whole athlete concept, when I was a cheerleader, I cheered middle school and high school the whole time. We did this. I don't remember if my coach told us to do this or if there was something I just did, but I think we all did it. But I would either walk or lie down and visualize myself doing a big cheer routine before we had a big routine or competition or something coming up. Visualize myself doing it full out and correctly, all the stunts hitting and everything going just right, and seeing it in my head first. So maybe there's something like that for you that you could use this on. Maybe it's an important conversation with someone, a dream you have in your life. Maybe it's a new service you want to create and you can go on a walk and try to visualize what that service would look like. Who would be in it? What would the experience be? How would the service look? How would you show up for it? Does that feel right? All of that kind of stuff. I literally did that one the other day because I'm working on a course for this business to maybe come out later this year or next year. And I went on a walk and was visualizing around that service, that course offer. So yeah, visualization walks, just try it out. There's no harm in trying, and see if that's something that helps you have like a new level of focus, a new level of clarity towards what you're working on. Okay, fourth thing. I've said this one is something I was excited about sharing. So I make decisions from the perspective of my future self. And I try to do this as often as possible. So making decisions from future focus versus past focus. Because if we just make decisions only based on what has been proven possible to us before, then we never move forward, because you stay stuck in what you only seeing yourself as capable of what you've already done before. So here's my question for you. If you are like listening to this and you're like, Elizabeth, all this is great, but I don't even know what I'm working for. Here are some prompts I would love for you to try journaling on, or even just thinking about, but journaling on will probably be even better. So first of all, answering this question: if anything were possible for you right now, what would you want to do the rest of this year? Whatever time you're listening to this, the rest of the year, if anything were possible, what would you want to do? And so you have to take that anything or possible thing. And it's really interesting because when you answer that question, you probably will have a lot come up. Like you might think of something where it's like, well, I'd love to do this, but that's not possible for me. Try to resist that and just let your mind run free of if anything were possible. What would you want to do the rest of 2020? Now you have your big crazy thing that you'll want to visualize. But then the next question here is a really important one. And I love this question. This is going to help make decisions from your future self. So what does that version of you do? How do they act? What do they believe about themselves in their business? And the big question there, if I already had accomplished this thing, how would I show up right now? And then you can show up for yourself and make decisions as the woman who already did the big thing. So if you've already accomplished the thing, how would you show up? And now you show up like that right now. And again, this is going to take you like more than just listening to me say this to figure out the answers to those questions. But when you do, it's really impactful because you can identify that version of you, how they think and act, and you can start deliberately showing up as that person now, which is really taking the visualization concept into major action, because you're choosing to like live from that place, operating from the future self versus past experiences. So those questions, again, I'll go ahead and just reread them so you can have them for journal prompt. If anything were possible for me right now, what would I want to do the rest of 2020, the rest of whatever year, the rest of this month, however you want to think of it, do what works best for you. Then the next question, that person that you wrote down about that has done the thing, how do they act? What do they do? What do they believe about themselves and their business? If you had already accomplished the thing, how would you show up right now? And ask yourself that question, and then show up for yourself and make decisions as the woman who has already done that big thing. Okay, so that's number 4, making decisions for your future self and operating from that perspective more than from just what you have seen proven possible before. Okay, a 5th way to put this into action. I tell someone the big crazy goals. So this goes back to number 1, really, which number 1 was when I was talking about writing down stuff, really specifically. So this kind of goes back to that. But I like to tell someone about my big crazy goals. And it doesn't have to be all your Twitter followers like Demi Lovato did, but maybe it's a business friend, a family member, people in a coaching program with you, your spouse, whoever. And I think just like how writing things is really powerful, speaking them is really powerful too. So to give you like a recent example of this for me, when I joined James Wedmore's program, Business by Design, in 2018, I literally told Adam and my dad that I was going to be a guest on his podcast at some point. I didn't know when, but I'm like, that's going to be something I'm going to do. And I didn't really know how. I just was like, that's a goal for me. It wasn't like in a cocky way, but more just like, that's a goal for me. I want to do that. And it was a focus for me, and something that felt like I have no idea how that will happen, but I want to happen. And my brain went to work when opportunities arrived to make that goal happen. And when it ended up actually making sense now in 2020. And then I was on the podcast. So my encouragement to you is find someone you can tell your big goals to. It's a cool thing about telling the goal too to someone else is that in your head, it might sound like, oh, this is too much. This is too crazy. It's too bizarre and outlandish. But then when you tell that big dream to someone who really loves you, they come to believe in you too, and it doesn't feel as crazy anymore. And I know going back to what I said in the beginning of this episode about my dad's recently passing away, he was really this person for me in so many ways. I know he will continue to be, even though he's not here anymore. But like, I could tell him some crazy thing in my business, like a crazy goal, and he'd be like, of course you'll do that. Like, of course that'll happen. Like that was how he approached the dreams I had, was like, oh, that's inevitable. And having someone like that in your life is so crazy impactful. So yeah, that's my 5th tip, is tell someone your big crazy goals. Don't just keep it on paper. Don't just keep it to yourself. Find someone you trust and talk to them about it. And if talking to them about it doesn't go like I just said, of someone saying, of course that'll happen for you, you gotta still be able to hold on to it. But it's helpful to have someone you can talk to about that. All right, guys, so that is it. Those are my tips. I'm going to reread the 5 tips just to help you like remember what I said, and basically just hear me say this list and figure out like, okay, what's one I want to try right now. So the first tip, writing down your crazy goals and dreams with specifics as if they had already happened. So writing it as if it is a fact, not a hope. Okay, number 2, the journal prompt of I am ready to welcome blank into the world, journaling on that. Number 3, visualization walks alone where you visualize things. Number 4, making decisions from the perspective of the future self, not from the past. And number 5, tell someone your big crazy goal, get it out loud and into the world. So I hope these tips are helpful to you, and I hope you'll take something from these different mindset and visualization techniques. And I also hope that I was not scattered in this episode and that you still got something from it. I felt a little off through the whole time of recording this and a bit emotional, as you can probably tell. I stopped recording multiple times, which, again, talking about that episode, I said, which one was that? A while back, episode 70, behind the scenes into my podcasting process. I talked about that episode. You're never hearing like this is going to be like 30 something minutes. I did not record this straight. I took some breaks to like regroup. And so anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. As always, I would really love to hear what you got out of it. Seriously. I read every message you guys send me on emails and on Instagram, Facebook, all of it. So wherever you like to message people, I would love it if you could send me a message. Tell me which one of these things you're going to try out and your thoughts on this episode. And if you haven't left a review for this podcast, I know I say this sometimes at the end of episodes, but please leave a review. It really does help the show grow. It helps other people like you find the show. And so if you want to, while you're leaving a review, just tell me what you learned from this episode. And you can kind of put it right there. But I'd love to hear from you. I'd love for you to share this with a friend who would benefit from hearing it. And yeah, I can't wait to see the ways you guys use these tips in your own life and business. So hope you enjoyed this. And I'll be back next week with another episode. Bye, you guys. Thank you for listening to the podcast this week, friend. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, I want to tell you about something. I would encourage you to check out my website template shop. Over on elizabethmccravey.com, you'll find Show It website templates, and they are easy to use, strategically designed, and created to help you book more clients and customers. Maybe your current website is really boring. I don't know. Maybe it is, and maybe you don't want to hurt its feelings, but you know it's true. And your website needs to be strategically and intentionally designed in order for it to convert your viewers into raving customers. And that's what these website templates do on MShop. These are pre-made website templates built for the Show It platform where you can plug and play your content into the template with ease and then get started with a website that is made to actually make you money. Isn't that what we all want, right? So go shop the templates at elizabethmccravey.com/shop. That link is also in the show notes. And don't forget that you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. And I would so appreciate it if you left a rating and review for the show on Apple Podcasts, or even just share it with a friend. It's a great way to support the show and then give us your feedback. So thanks so much for listening.